So if we are awake, and if we understand how the mind works, and then we begin to make skillful choices, we can take the mind to that deep silence, which I think is spirituality. We can liberate the mind from suffering, even within physical difficulties. Physically, we're limited by a certain deck of cards, right, that we're given, okay? Mentally also, to some extent. So if a person has a mental illness and they cannot be aware, that's very difficult. That's very, very difficult. But if we can be aware and we can be awake and work within whatever social, physical constraints that are given us, we can develop skills, inner skills, to bring the mind to a deep sense of silence and peace. One of the things I suffered a lot from, I was a fearful chap. I was afraid to answer phones. Can you imagine that? And like giving talks used to just terrify me. Now I'm just enjoy it. But I used to be very afraid of giving talks. And I decided that the best way for me to understand fear was to give talks. Right? So I began to use this very kind of venue as a way of understanding fear and making skillful choices to liberate the heart from fear. Now the thing about understanding fear, well, is not so easy. And that's I'd like to talk about one of the paradigms or one of the models that the Buddha used for understanding oneself. And it's a medical model. And the model basically it says that there is disease, there's a cause of disease, there's a cure, good prognosis, and there's medicine, there's a path. And the disease is suffering. Not physical suffering. That's disease too. But there's also the disease of suffering, like fear. When I'm caught in fear, that hurts, doesn't it? Or when I'm caught up in, like I'm taking care of my mom now. I've been with her 8 years. I'm not used to living in a condo with my mother for 8 years. I probably did some time back, but I had longer hair then. So it's been an interesting kind of challenge for me. And I love my mom dearly, and we get on great. We don't have any issues. But to be honest, sometimes I'd rather not be there. I'd rather be in New Zealand. I'd rather be in a monastery. And I found that very interesting for me was to like use this constraint of being with mom in a voluntary way and begin to understand how can I free myself from any limits, from suffering. And one of the most difficult things for me has been not wanting to take care of her. Like, taking care of her is great. I like to do it. But it's those bits in an afternoon or a morning or whenever when I'm fed up, right? And I don't want to do this anymore. And I feel resistance. And I know she knows me inside out. So I can't hide anything, right? Which are very threatening. They're very threatening. Because I want to just love her all the time. And I do 99% of the time. But I'm human. And it's impossible to love everyone all the time. What I began to watch in my own, this is in the suffering I experienced with my mom, there's a tremendous amount of goodness. There's a amount of like love is a lovely thing to develop, isn't it? I mean, it's a great opportunity. But those bits in my mind when I feel like impatient or not wanting to do this and wanting to be somewhere else, and then they've been very, very threatening because I don't want them there. And we get back to the medical analogy. What we do in Buddhism is when I'm suffering, I have to understand my suffering. If I'm going to develop skill, if I'm going to develop skillful means to liberate the heart from suffering, I have to understand my suffering. One of the things in our culture which we're not good at being. We're good at doing, but being consciousness we're not good at. We're always like filling the mind with something or going somewhere, doing something, but actually being, and then being with suffering. Being with the feeling that I don't want to take care of my mom is very unpleasant for me. Because I'm very idealistic. I have a strong sense of idealism that I should love my mom all the time. But the reality in this moment, say, is, well, suffering feels this way. What does it really feel like not to want to take care of your mom? I still take care of her. You know, I still butter the toast and do all of that, but to actually be mindful of something which is unpleasant, to actually do that, to stand under your suffering, to know it. When I did that and I watched, I thought, well, what's the problem? The problem is you don't want to feel this way. That's the real problem. You don't like this feeling of aversion. You don't like this feeling of negativity. So that's the cause. You have the disease, there's the suffering. I have to understand it. I have to stand under it, I have to look at it. And the cause of that suffering is not wanting the way things are, or wanting the things other than they are. Right? And that's a huge one in human consciousness. Right? I don't want what I have, or I want what I don't have. Simple enough. Now, when I can see that, and I can say, well, what's the real problem? Is the problem that I don't want to be here, or is it the problem that I don't like that emotion, that I don't want that emotion because of my idealism or whatever? I said, that's the problem, because I'm not doing this. I'm not deliberately making myself think this way. I'm just tired. I'm just pooped. I'm exhausted. So you're going to feel that way, yeah. But what does it really feel like? And when I can be with that feeling, this is just an example, then that feeling endures for a while. I feel the tension in the body, but I'm with it. I stay with it. I stay with it. I stay with it, and it ceases. And in its cessation, there's peace. And that peace is not the peace of me getting what I want. It's the peace of me letting go of wanting. You just have to do little things, like in developing the mind, just little things, little choices. So this kind of medical paradigm is very, very helpful, because if I want to be free from suffering, first of all, I have to take responsibility for that. There might be some external factors, but if I really want to be free and I'm interested in this deep silence of the heart, I have to go into that. I have to understand that. I have to stop and look. And one of the ways that we do that, of course, in Buddhism is that we do a lot of meditation. It's a big part of the Buddha's training is the training of the mind. Now, meditation is, for most people, it seems to be a very, very difficult skill to develop. Partially, I think, because our culture is so much into accomplishment, doing, becoming, and filling the mind. What our culture doesn't do, it doesn't allow us to be, what is it? It doesn't allow us just to be with ourselves. It's always pulling us out, into a video or audio or duty or responsibility, and our attention is always drawn out into external things, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's also a place in the development of human consciousness of stillness, of non-becoming, non-doing, of abiding in a sense of being. I think we get that, when you go to a lake, a beautiful Ontario lake, and you see the pine trees, and you see the stillness of the water, and the rock, and the sky, and the sound of a loon. What is that stillness there, which is different than excitement? Excitement's fine, but what is that stillness where you're just with that? That's just a sense of being. That's what we're trying to cultivate in meditation. Now, when we meditate on all kinds of themes. We might use the breath. We might use ideas of compassion. We might use bodily meditations, all kinds of meditations. But what we're essentially doing is we're trying to be mindful for a span of, say, half an hour. Half an hour where we're trying to just be aware of the way things are. So we might take the breath, we sit down, and we try to meditate on the feeling of the breathing. And of course what happens is fall asleep, get bored, knees start to hurt, all kinds of other things start to happen, and the mind gets restless. But what we try to do is we try to bring the mind back to this is the way it is now. I feel this way now. And keep letting go of all the distractions. So I was thinking about CF. Now it seems, if I've got it right, most CF people have to do 1 to 4 hours of pretty serious disciplined activity a day. That's true, right? So I was saying, okay, so what would be the difference for me in just doing an hour's exercise and doing an hour's exercise as meditation?